The psychedelic revolution is here. If you want to integrate your visionary experiences into your purpose, get clear on your entrepreneurial path, and help people while you do what you love, then this podcast is for you. Welcome to The Psychedelic Entrepreneur, medicine for these times. I'm your host, Beth Weinstein. I'm a spiritual business coach, 3-time entrepreneur, and a lifelong student of psychedelics and sacred plant medicines. You carry your own unique medicine, and your medicine is what we need for these times. This podcast will help you to share your medicine so you can create transformation in the world. Listen in on conversations with psychedelic leaders, changemakers, and conscious entrepreneurs who are living proof that a better world is possible when you follow your heart and live in alignment with your soul. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Medicine for These Times. I'm Beth Weinstein. Today's guest, I'm so excited to finally connect with after trying to get an interview. There's been a back and forth, but we have Dr. Katherine MacLean with us. Hi, Katherine. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. And this is a much better time to get me. I'm relaxed. I'm happy. I just got my book out. So this is way better than January or February.
Yeah. So good. And we're going to get into this and hear more about your book, but congratulations. I know this is so huge. And, you know, I know I've been following your work for a while, and it's kind of like this book has been in you. And I have that feeling, right? That it's been in you for years.
Yes, it has. It's my third child, basically.
Exactly. That's it. It's exactly like birthing a child, right? Well, I'm going to tell the audience a little bit about your background, then we'll get into your work and your story. But Dr. Katherine MacLean is a neuroscientist with expertise in studying the effects of mindfulness meditation and psychedelics on cognitive performance, emotional well-being, spirituality, and brain function. As a postdoctoral research fellow and faculty member at the Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine, she conducted clinical trials of psilocybin, the primary chemical found in magic mushrooms, and other psychedelic compounds. Her groundbreaking research on psilocybin and personality change suggests that psychedelic medicines can enhance openness to new experiences and promote mental health and emotional well-being throughout the lifespan. Dr. MacLean co-founded and directed the first Center for Psychedelic Education and Training in New York, and was featured in the New Yorker article entitled The Trip Treatment by Michael Pollan, and her TED Talk has been viewed nearly 50,000 times. Midnight Water is her first book. So can I call you Katherine or Dr. MacLean?
Katherine is great.
Great. So Katherine, I always love to know, how did you get into your line of work? What even took you into going and getting a doctorate and becoming a neuroscientist and, going into psychedelics? And I'm curious how psychedelics might have played a part in your own personal journey.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. One of the parts that I usually leave out of this story, I've decided to start being more open about, because I think a lot of people are now facing the choice of what medicine is right for me. And interestingly, when I was about 17 or 18, like many American high school, college kids, I was introduced to alcohol. And what I didn't know about myself was that I really wanted to transcend reality in my body. So that meant I drank a lot when I did drink. It was really dangerous. And so interestingly, as a freshman at Dartmouth, I got busted twice in a row, once for having a party in my dorm room and another for trying to get home from a frat very drunk. And so because I got 2 strikes, they're like, third strike, you're suspended from college. And I was valedictorian. I was on the track team. I was like, this is not going to go over well. So I had to do basically a rehabilitation education class. And that's when I learned that there were so many better drugs out there. So in a funny way, it's alcohol kind of did its part to get me on the right track. And I learned about Arrowhead. I learned about MDMA. I learned about mushrooms. So it's I just dove into all of this fascinating material. And because I was at an Ivy League school with, wealthy frat kids coming up from New York City, we had every drug you could possibly imagine. And, for better or for worse, this was 20 years ago. I would not recommend what I did in college to anyone else at this time, because it's much more dangerous. But it was kind of this 4 years of self-experimentation and finding out what does this stuff do? And then at the same time, I actually was still doing well enough in my classes. So I was studying neuroscience and psychology, and I got a job in a monkey lab. And my mentor was like, well, you can choose the neuroscience path, but you're clearly obsessed with, human consciousness, and you're never going to be satisfied studying rhesus macaques. Like, they're never going to give you, even if they have a really, amazing consciousness, you're never going to be able to tap into it. So basically at the grad school point, I interviewed with like half neuroscience and half human psychology, cognitive sci. And UC Davis was where they didn't bat an eye at psychedelics, and everywhere else had like a judgment about it. That'll never happen here. Even Berkeley, like now it's like they've got a huge center. But at the time, 20 years ago, it was a very different world. You talk about meditation and psychedelics and people are like, okay, wacko, thank you very much. Like, moving on. So yeah, it was really just from my own personal obsession with changing my own consciousness and then wanting to understand how that happened.
Wow. And so I'm curious, when you went to UC Davis, and did you then like basically, form your own path there, or were there other scientists working on this? Like, how did you, because you are one of the known, like, what I would say like modern pioneers of the psychedelic movement, and it kind of been like OG in the space, but how did you link up with some of these other scientists doing research around the world, or how did that kind of all take off?
Yeah, well, if you remember, so this was in 2004. There was hardly any psychedelic research happening, and the stuff at Hopkins was still very under the radar. They didn't come out with their first paper until 2006. So the folks at UC Davis actually did take a huge gamble on me, because it wasn't like they could point to like, oh, there's that one lab in Switzerland. No, nobody even knew about Franz Vollenweider. There wasn't an Imperial College, research team. There was nothing. There were like little tiny dribs and drabs. Hardly anyone knew about Rick Strassman in human psychology academia. People knew about him in drug research. But there was just kind of the belief that like we could study human consciousness, and that was an okay thing to study. And so at UC Davis, there were people studying meditation, music, human emotions, multisensory processing in autism. So it was kind of like a natural fit. It was like a bunch of eccentric but very smart scientists all trying to push the limits of like, how do humans experience reality? And so in the middle of the big meditation study that we did, Roland's paper first came out, the 2006 Mystical Experience paper. And I remember just being like, this is my golden ticket. Like, I had just won the like Willy Wonka like chocolate bar. And I was like, this is where I'm going. And so if the timing had been off by a few years, like, it wouldn't have happened for me. I would have been plugging away at meditation science or some other kind of neuroscience. Maybe I would be jumping on the bandwagon now, now that everyone's feeling like it's safe. But at the time, like, it was like gamble after gamble. And I think that's also kind of why I left when I did, because it wasn't as like risky anymore. It was like, oh, it's gotten normalized. Like, now I'm going to go do something else, find out what the next like risky thing is to try.
I love it. I love this, like, really being shown that you are driven by a personal, like passion of yours, like your own quest for exploring consciousness and experimentation. And then, yeah, that like cutting edge, like, hey, this is not risky enough, not cutting edge enough. So I'm curious, like, then what did your path take you to next? Did you then just go into private practice, or were you doing, tell us a little bit about the research that you were doing that has kind of shaped everything else.
Yeah. So when I joined the Hopkins team, I was a researcher. I had no clinical training. And so I basically got thrown into these high dose sessions with Bill Richards and Mary Casamano as the lead guide. And I was like the person taking notes, making sure someone could get to the bathroom, like feeding them grapes. I was like the assistant, the like nameless background person in all of psychedelic research. And very quickly, we learned kind of two things. One was that I had an ability to notice when things were kind of like going sideways a little bit and kind of steer things back on track. And I think, honestly, it was from how much self-experience I had that, it's like, if your friend is starting to have a bad experience, you're not going to like just wait and see what happens. You're going to be like, all right, let's try to navigate, through this so that you get the most out of the experience. And the second thing was that Bill and Mary also thought that I actually knew what I was doing clinically. Now, these were healthy people. They weren't getting treatment, they didn't have a diagnosis. So I still kind of hold to this now, but at the time, there wasn't this idea that we were like treating anyone. There wasn't, it wasn't a medical model. It was a psychopharmacology model. So you don't need to be a therapist to be in the room with someone. And so in a way, again, I was very lucky that I came in when I did because I got all of this hands-on guiding training, which now you have to be a clinician, you have to be licensed, you have to be a doctor. I don't agree with that, but I think it's probably good that it keeps some of the riffraff out. It's like not anybody could be a psychedelic guide. And so that was kind of like a big chunk of my time. And the other half was trying to figure out what research would land me a gig at Hopkins. And that was the hard part. So I had the openness paper come out, which was huge, but to medical people, they're like, who cares about personality? Like, that's not going to get you onto faculty. Interesting. I had a whole kind of protocol envisioned to compare psilocybin and ketamine on changes in neurotransmitters in the brain. This was 10 years before anyone was talking about ketamine or psilocybin for depression. So it's like I kept kind of like throwing darts at the wall, trying to see what would stick at this medical institution. And I did that until my life just took me in a completely other direction. But looking back, I think that what I learned was I don't want to work in a medical institution. And like I really liked guiding, but it was really hard and it was very emotionally taxing. So like, I imagine getting back into it at another stage in my life, but like at the time, like I'm kind of glad that I took a big long detour while everything else kind of got built up in the meantime. And I'll let the psychiatrists and therapists and whoever take the risks for the next 10 years while I just kind of chill, write some books, enjoy my life.
My God. No, this is interesting what you just said about guiding, because this has come up for discussion a lot, and I've even spoken about this. I think now that there's just this kind of surge of popularity, and now training programs, and then the legalization, decriminalization. To me, there's this glamorization of being a psychedelic guide or a trip sitter or space holder, whatever we want to call it, an underground therapist. And, it's interesting because I'm like, well, do people realize that it can get really like boring and long, and it's actually like emotionally taxing, and there's a lot of energy you're holding, and, depending on who you're working with, like it can be a lot.
Yeah.
And I'm curious to hear a little bit about what you say about that you don't agree with, the fact that only certain people are allowed to, let's say, legally hold this space and, be psychedelic sitters. Because I also disagree with that as well. Because it's like the analogy, how many of us have had bad doctors or bad dentists? It's like, yes, the dentist went to dental school for, however many years and has all this training, and they're still bad. So I don't think the degrees or the training necessarily means that someone's good or capable or knows what they're doing. But I'm curious, what are your thoughts on that, especially now in today's world with, you can go do a 6-month training and voila, you can become get a license and be a official psychedelic guide out in Oregon.
Right.
What are your feelings on what's happening right now in this world?
Yeah. So on the one hand, if what was required was a 20-year apprenticeship with a shaman or a very skilled underground person with supervision, with constant feedback from your community, with everyone in the community, including the people who you have helped and your teachers all agreeing like this person is certified, I would actually be behind that. But we don't have that. What we have is people who put in 10 years or so in medical school or, psychotherapy training, and then a little bit of extra licensing and supervision around psychedelics, and suddenly they're experts. And I think that's actually dangerous because it tells the people who are getting the experience that there's an authority figure in the room and they know what to do. And we know that that's not true with psychedelics. You can be good at what you do and you can still admit, like, I'm not an authority. I'm not an expert. I'm here to help you. You're the one who is having this experience, and I'm just going to make sure you're safe, that you don't go down too many like dark alleyways, that you're not intending to go down. And that I help you get the support you need afterward, mostly by kind of putting you back into your community, into your life, into your family. And so I think the risk of licensing and all of those guidelines is that it tells people that they're an expert. If it didn't tell you you're an expert, if it just said you're like I had this term about, 5 years ago, a good Samaritan. Like you get certified as a good psychedelic Samaritan. Like you're not going to abuse or assault anybody. You're not going to financially steal from people. You're not going to treat people that are beyond your capacity. If you can like prove that to your community, sure, let's certify you as like a basically decent person who can sit in a room with someone, But, I get nervous when medical and academic authority figures start asserting their role in a space that is not part of that kind of culture. And so that's one side of it. I think the other side is there's a lot of money to be made. And while I have been an extreme beneficiary of capitalism across my life, I can see that it's not benefiting most people. Like I happen to be one of the lucky ones, but there's no rhyme or reason around that. And there are systemic reasons why people don't benefit. So what I see happening with some of the licensing and training is that we're still elevating the top people to even greater status, and we're giving them a lot of money. And it's a little bit removed from, it's like, when Maria Sabina first gave Gordon Wasson mushrooms, she died very poor. She was not taken care of during her life, and she just gave and gave and gave. And so from that point in the 50s to where we are now, it's like, how have we gotten so far away from where this started? And that's just one example. There are many living examples of what she did that are still happening. I know white people born in America living paycheck to paycheck, and that's kind of a metaphor because they don't get a paycheck, but they're just making medicine, giving it away, trying to kind of fill in the gaps. They're not getting access to this licensing and training. So it's a lot to kind of pack in, but I think most humans who aren't intending to harm, and that's a tricky question, but if you're not intending to harm, you can learn how to be present for someone else through birth, through death, through psychedelics. So I'd love the conversation to be like, how can we train as many people as possible to do this for their friends and family? And just, the authorities can kind of still do their thing, but most people won't ever engage with them.
I'm so glad you share this perspective. And I actually am like, I think we need to elevate this conversation, like get it out everywhere, because it's been interesting just observing what's happening out there. I have a few clients who actually have been working in Oregon who are involved in the training programs, and one of them helped open one of the first psilocybin service centers. And, they're just good people who've been on this path for a very long time. Some of them are trained medically and trained in other areas, but not necessarily like, oh, I'm a psychedelic therapist who's been at this for 40 years. It's like, just good people with a good heart that know what they're doing, that somehow like fell into it. But it's been interesting to hear a lot of the inside scoop, like the perspectives and also the reality of what's happening. And it's been very, even they're a little, I shouldn't say a little, like a lot disheartened about, like the money, the amount of, they've both said like the amount of regulation and time that's been spent just even trying to understand the regulation. And then, it's like in the end, like, what is this all for? Well, there's people that are out there who are like really desperate for a solution. Like the one that helped open the service center, they said the first week they opened, they got like 1,500 signups, with people like a waiting list, people that are like, I will travel there. I'm desperate. I don't know where else to turn. Maybe they can't go on some $5,000 retreat in Jamaica, but it's like that quality of the demand being very high and the quote supply. And when I say supply, I say like, legal supply being unaffordable, inaccessible, people not even knowing where to get it, people not having it in their communities, or, not having friends that grow mushrooms, and I think it's been an argument, and just kind of listening to the gist of the whole like underground. And when I say underground, it's, it's everywhere. It's like everybody's talking about this, where are we just turning this into the next, big pharma that's like, okay, now it's turning into just another version of a Prozac,
right?
Where you have to go to a provider and you have to get a prescription, then you have to refill it, and then you have to stay on it. And it's like, is this really the answer?
I mean, I don't think it's the answer. Yeah. And I do think, I think there are other answers. And I think that, interestingly, it's psychedelics that help you see that there are other possibilities you haven't considered. And sometimes I wonder, like, for all of the excitement, like, have these people allowed, the people who have these ideas, have they allowed psychedelics to really work through them? And is this the best solution that the psychedelics shared with you, or like helped illuminate in your own mind? Like, it can't be. The things that like mushrooms have shared with me are like so wild and out there for like how humans can relate to reality and nature. There's no way that people are, saying like, oh, this was so helpful. Let's create a bureaucracy that's really hard to access and understand, that's super expensive, and people will get sued if anyone gets hurt. No way. The mushrooms don't even speak that language. So it tells you right there that the answers are not coming from within psychedelics. They're coming from outside of psychedelics and applying into that space. So what I'm suggesting is that we actually ask within the psychedelic space, like, what are the solutions for humankind right now? And if you look around, I mean, it's getting more dangerous to travel. It's getting more dangerous for a lot of people to live where they're living. I mean, if California, Oregon, and Colorado are the only places people can go, what happens when there are wildfires, drought? I mean, here in Vermont, we just had a lot of flooding. So it's kind of the other end of the spectrum. But it's becoming increasingly hard for people to leave where they live to seek treatment. And so how do we make psychedelics available to people where they are in a safe way? And yes, I think mushrooms are the easiest because they can grow anywhere. They'll always be available. But mushrooms are hard for a lot of people. So it's like, my big thing now is like, what would it look like to have a like public supply of MDMA that's tested and high quality, and like you get two doses a year? And you could either take them or sell them to a friend or give them away. Like, I know it's a little bit crazy, but like not so crazy in my world. Like I would benefit from that, being able to say, all right, I'm going to go check in and get my like ration of MDMA for the year. And if people want more, they can pay for it. And if people want less, they don't even have to go. So, in a tiny state like Vermont, it could work. And I'm trying to kind of talk to politicians in a way to help them think creatively well beyond the kind of standard models. But at the same time, I know we're probably going to end up with synthetics, psilocybin and MAPS MDMA in a hospital. And like, after all is said and done, like that may be the best bet for most people. And then there's still the underground. So I guess the final thing I want to say is that what feels the scariest is that it could become much more dangerous to operate in the underground at all. People who are making, MDMA now, what kind of penalties will be enacted to justify the investment that has been put into, MAPS going for profit and selling shares? It doesn't seem like a stretch to imagine in 5 years from now that the penalties for making MDMA will be prohibitive for most people to engage in that kind of risky practice. And we saw people go to, prison for life for making LSD. So it's like, it's very optimistic if you think about the community level. And it's also fucking terrifying if you think about how governments try to shut down things that compete with what they're offering.
Hey everyone, just a quick break to remind you that the True Path Entrepreneur Group Mastermind Program is open for enrollment now. We start at the beginning of 2024 in January, but we are starting to take applications now. If you'd like to learn more, you can check out the Mastermind webpage on my site at bethaweinstein.com/mastermind. This is a 12-month group community-oriented mastermind program where you learn how to start, grow, and get clients in your business so that you can help more people, make a difference in the world, and do work that you absolutely love. This mastermind program is designed for new and early stage coaches, healers, psychedelic entrepreneurs, therapists, and anybody who wants to do transformational work in the world and wants to learn the exact steps you need to know to grow your business to the next level, to be able to share your unique medicine and make a difference in the world. So again, that's BethAWeinstein.com/mastermind. The True Path Entrepreneur Group Business Coaching Mastermind Program is open now. I know, and it's interesting because this discussion has come up so much as like, okay, well, maybe this legalization, regulation will make it better. But then there's, I kept saying, with Colorado, when Colorado was passing, I was like, wait a second. Like, I think we need to read between a lot of the lines and read some of the fine print here and see what's really happening. And from what I'm understanding, it's still kind of a mess. They haven't totally figured it all out. There's still a lot of bills coming in and on the table and back and forth. But I know someone that was arrested, the same year that was passed and has been on house arrest for possession of ayahuasca.
Wow.
Plant medicine. There's been people in Mexico that have been in jail for over a year, again, just for like simple possession of a plant medicine that's, to me, generally what I would call harmless. And I do agree. Like there's talks of, well, maybe all this influx of legalization, decriminalization will help the underground, but I also believe that it could completely backfire.
Yeah.
Well, and that's where I think we need the underground no matter what.
Yeah. Well, I think, a lot of the extreme harm reduction people, like the folks at, is it SDDP or SD? Yeah, I always forget the exact acronym, but the Students for Sensible Drug, SSDP, and some of the, that are really pushing for the decriminalization of all drugs. The reason they're doing that is because people's entire lives are getting ruined for something that they are using either because it makes them feel better, it makes them feel less worse, or, it helps them function, right? So it's like, if you think about it that way, I've got 2 little kids. If I need to use mushrooms sometimes because I get migraines and I could go to prison for that and lose my children, like that's insane. And yet it's happening. And probably the only reason it doesn't happen in the circles that are making the laws is because they're privileged. And they have status and they have power. So they're like, oh, none of these bad things are ever going to happen. And they're just ignoring the reality for a lot of people, which is, yes, moms are going to prison because they're using drugs. They are losing custody of their children because they're using what I should call controlled substances, right? Because there's a lot of drugs that we're allowed to use.
Yes.
Apparently alcohol is safe to use around children. Apparently,
sugar.
I could drink as much Benadryl as I want, which is incredibly dangerous. But it's just like, sure, buy 10 bottles at the pharmacy and go home and drink them all. Like no one's holding your hand. So it's very hypocritical. And, at the same time that psychedelics aren't totally safe, I think they're a lot safer than some of the alternatives. And we should treat people like grown-ups. It's like we're letting people make all sorts of other decisions for their own, health and well-being. So why suddenly the gatekeeping around psychedelics? Mm-hmm. I feel like there has to be another reason, and it's not just the money. I think that the folks in charge see this as a way to sustain a lot of the power dynamics and the status of certain people. Like keep making the healthiest people healthier and functioning while the world basically goes to shit.
Yeah, the 1%. Yeah, I mean, I agree. Like if we follow the trails, almost every discussion I've had for the last, 4 years, 4.5, 5 years straight, it always leads back to money and power and control.
Right.
And systems, systems that are completely broken, that are not serving the large majority of the population. They're serving a really great piece of the population at the top. So this is something that always, I even say it's like, well, and I think I've even read where you've said this. I think it's you that have said similar things, I'm sure. But, it's kind of like people are turning to, let's say, microdosing to help with their depression or anxiety. And then I'm like, well, wait, what is at the root of the depression and anxiety in the first place? Yes. And that's where I'm like, why aren't we actually putting the time and energy and effort into at least not bypassing what's at the root? Right. Maybe we're not going to fix the system overnight, even though all of us really would love to see things fixed overnight, but to at least acknowledge, okay, what is causing your depression? oh, you're working at a job that you hate, to be part of the rat race, to be able to just survive in our modern day, system, especially in certain parts of the US, let's say, where we both live. It's like, I mean, I see it all the time, even with clients. It's like, wow, it's like that hamster wheel that people can't get off of. And then they wonder why they have no meaning, why they're depressed, and why they feel lonely and isolated, even though they have $1 million home and make hundreds of thousands of dollars at their corporate job. It's like,
right.
And that's like a privileged person. So imagine being, a factory worker, getting minimum wage, being in a community that doesn't really have, any of that maybe the 10% client of mine has. And it's like, to just acknowledge that, right, I think is something that we all need to begin with,
Yeah. And there's also something I go back to. So as you were talking, I was imagining like what infrastructure for the system does psychedelics provide? And so think about every hospital, they have a cancer wing. They have a cancer unit. It was donated by some very wealthy couple or single person who benefited in a certain way. They want to help everyone. It feels very good. It's like, well, I've had 2 family members go through major cancer wings of hospitals, and they died the same as everybody else dies. It's painful, it's hard, it's confusing. All you want to do is be home with your family. So like, what does a cancer wing buy us? It buys us a little bit of time, and it puts a whole lot of money in a whole lot of pockets while you're getting slowly sicker and sicker. Some people get cured, don't get me wrong, but most people being treated for cancer will eventually die of cancer. And you can check me on this. Some enterprising person can check the statistics, but it's rare that cancer doesn't eventually progress in some way. So you've got a cancer wing. Imagine if every hospital has a psychedelic wing, and suddenly everyone feels really good about like, well, this is where you go if you have chronic depression. And we're never going to actually treat your depression. We're just going to help you manage your depression and live as long as possible, being like slightly miserable your whole life. Like you have slightly elevated cancer levels, but we'll just keep them right there. We're not going to cure you and we're not going to let you die, but we're going to make sure that you keep, and every time you come in, it's, $20,000, or like this infusion is $5,000. And actually we came up with a really great drug that only lasts 2 minutes, and it's called, something DMT. So you still pay $20,000, but you only get 5 minutes of the experience, and then you're back in your car driving home, right? So it's cynical, but it's like I see that model being applied to psychedelics, and it's like that's why the money is there, because they see that this is the next like thing that can just get added on to every big institution that is becoming irrelevant. It's like, how are we going to keep these hospitals and medical institutions and universities going? And just look over here. Don't look at the climate catastrophe. Like, look at all the nice, pretty buildings with the beautiful hospitals. And it's like, oh, okay, maybe that's part of it.
I know, and I'm sitting here like giggling and laughing, but feeling so much.
I know, you have to just laugh at some point. I know, that's so fucking, it is depressing. It's like, this is where we're at as a species. And it's like, we can't address the root cause of our misery because our misery is self-created. And for most of us, we didn't do it, but it's like we're participating in it.
Yeah.
And, every year there's wildfires, drought, famine, all this. We're going to go into a third world war soon. I mean, that's coming down the horizon. And at the same time, you're like, well, we need people to still like participate in life. So how do we do that? It's like, well, maybe there's a drug that will help them feel good like for 3 months.
And it's interesting because in the last couple years, and I'm actually I'm very particular about platforming anybody that just works with ketamine. I decided this years ago because I've always had very mixed feelings on, I mean, yes, I do believe it has this great potential, veterans and PTSD. But why have I met a few people in the last couple of years who spend over $90,000 a year on their ketamine? And I'm like, wait, how much ketamine are you taking? I mean, I met someone who's like, oh, I do it weekly. And I'm like, weekly? Like, I didn't know this was and then it's like, well, how is this different than being on just another antidepressant? And by the way, there are some, it's like, it's not just the one drug that'll fix everything. And it's like, well, wait, how is this any different than what you might have been doing before and what we've been doing all these years that we're trying to change.
Right.
Is this helping that you need to be spending $100K on ketamine year after year after year after year, instead of actually like diving into the root and making changes and, like actually making your life different so that this isn't something you need. And then it's like, well, what about the people that need that, like for real, that can't afford $100,000 a year in ketamine?
Wow. Or why do we have legal ketamine infusion clinics but no supervised heroin injection sites? Like,
oh my God. No.
In my view, it's like people should be allowed to use the drugs they want to use. If we actually had heroin injection sites alongside the ketamine clinics, I'd be like, well, at least it's not hypocritical. Like, this is just what people need and that's what they want. And maybe some people, like, for me, like I said in the beginning, my hook was alcohol. It like got its hook in me and has been kind of dragging me through my life to different extents at different points in time. For some people, it's heroin. For other people, it's ketamine, So it's like, some people, it's marijuana, It's like in your own karma, your own background, your family history, your medical history, your genetics, like, I feel like each of us finds a substance that is like our, like almost like our angel and our devil, right? So it's like, for me, my angel was like MDMA, not perfect all the time, but like, if it's been like a while and I'm like, man, I just do not feel like myself, MDMA helps me remember who I am. Thank God, For some people, it might be something else. But alcohol is like the devil on my shoulder. Yeah, it's like, I'll make you feel better. Just give into all of the storyline about how this will reduce your anxiety and like make life easier and like numb you out. It's like, oh, right. I know you tell this story, but it's never true. And like, I forget and I believe it for a little bit. So with all that being said, I mean, ketamine is like the worst possible psychedelic for us to start with. Like, of all of the ones that we could have started with. And it's like, why ketamine? It's like, yes, it's helpful, but I talked to, like, say 5 different people who have been in the psychedelic field for decades. Every single one of them knows someone that lost their life to ketamine. Every single one. So again, maybe not a high total percentage, but if all of us know one person, I don't know a single person who lost their life to mushrooms. I'm sure it happens, but it's like, how is it that you can ask medical doctors, psychonauts, underground people, like, and everyone's like, oh yeah, that person really slid into that and, it cost them their life. And like, here we go. We're just giving it out to the whole population. And again, it's like, what is the motivation here? Are we trying to disconnect people from paying attention to what's really going on? If you want to do that, ketamine's a great drug to disconnect people from what's really going on.
Yeah. And that's the argument I heard that made me actually second guess even putting people on my platform, because it's this dissociative, when I actually believe, we need to be doing the opposite. We need to be engaged and feel all the feelings fully, including like the massive, collective grief and sorrow. And like you said, like these huge issues that are happening on the planet that we can't disassociate from forever, because they're going to just get worse and worse and worse. And we can't pretend it's not happening.
Right.
So I actually think we need to this is my theory, and this is why I am on the path I'm on, where it's like, well, yeah, these are not the most pleasurable substances that I work with, but I get that practice of being able to really be engaged in like, grief and sorrow and anger and rage and sadness and like joy and ecstasy and pleasure, but to actually witness, like, here's what's really happening, and then be able to channel hopefully my time and energy into like, well, here's the little seed I'm going to plant that hopefully makes some kind of contribution to the planet.
Right.
And that's kind of where, the work I do is kind of, I'm interested in this discussion around how psychedelics, might contribute to this larger, what I call like purpose, just for use of a simple word, but for people waking up to having some kind of, meaning or contribution, even if it's just, putting their art in the world, or speaking their voice, or finally doing something that they love that lights them up, that makes them enjoy this human experience instead of numbing themselves with whatever it is, shopping, TikTok, Netflix, alcohol, drugs, sugars, what, and not to say there's
that's a good list. I'm like taking notes, like, because I need like other examples that aren't chemicals for people to realize. Like when I told my 8-year-old daughter that she had gotten addicted to this like stupid My Little Pony show on our vacation, she's like, oh, I was like, yeah, it's like just like a drug, honey. And you know how you told me, she's like Miss Purist. She's like, I'm never drinking coffee. I'm never drinking alcohol. I want to be clear-headed. I was like, well, My Little Ponies is a drug. And she's like, she immediately stopped like that afternoon. She's like, I'm not letting this contaminate my mind. It's like,
I love it. No, it's funny because, this is actually what woke me up, and I've been working with psychedelics since I was a kid, like, 30 years. I got really into running marathons and ultra marathons. And what I started noticing, because it was my way of like not drinking alcohol too much, because I was like a super partier, drugs, alcohol.
Right.
And I was still partying, but the running helped me shift from like partying too much, living in New York City, to like running obsessive, marathon every month. And what I started noticing, not only did it attract a lot of former addicts, but it was like just a different addiction, but we all wrote it off as like, oh, well, this is healthy. But, pounding your body for 5 hours a time, 5 hours a weekend on a run, like that would be like our life. Like, oh, we just go on like a 4-hour run, and then traveling and going on these like 7-hour runs. And then like, it was this whole, and I was like, oh my God, it's the same thing. It's just, we're pretending like it's okay and better, but, we're getting hurt. People are bloody toenails. People are getting IVs. I mean, I've seen everything, like back injury. And I'm like, wait, how is this? And then I realized, I was like, wait, how do we use anything as a coping mechanism? And why aren't we just feeling what's really happening here? And that's, of course, like, I believe
it's hard to do that.
Yeah, of course, it's like the hard work that I don't want to do it. Feeling grief and sadness and being aware of what's actually happening on the planet, it sucks. It's hard. But it's also like, well, are we going to just bypass everything that's happening, or maybe try to at least, like you said, like connect to the psychedelics, and maybe there's something that they can, work with us to come up with a solution versus, by the way, there's a great meme out there by Dennis Micropreneur podcast that I literally just saw the other day that was, a meme about someone having this ayahuasca journey and then saying like, let's start a bureaucracy where we can sell stocks.
Well, I wish I had seen that. And it's so funny that I like mimicked that exact, but it's like
the exact
meme. So it's interesting. It's like in my, so kind of what I ended up writing in my book was like one woman's take on like a creative alternative way of seeing things. And I like told it through what I tried and what I did. But interestingly, I think, and I'm sure Dennis McKenna or Terrence McKenna have said this before, but I try to illuminate how the mushrooms actually can speak to you and give you solutions for your life. If you would just like tune into the frequency a little bit and be like, hey, like intelligent being, thing that's been here way longer than humans, like, what do you have to say about this? And sometimes they're just like, oh, whatever, that's stupid. I have nothing to say. Or like, I don't know, being a mom, that seems like just do it, right? Can't be that hard, But sometimes they've got good ideas. And what would it be like for humans to just like take down a notch on the pedestal and just say like, maybe plants and mushrooms have some good ideas because they've survived a lot longer on this planet than we have. And we have clearly ruined everything in a very short period of time. And you don't have to have a specific spiritual framework to take advantage of that. It can just be like, if you have an insightful dream, it's like if you talk to musicians, their songs come to them in dreams or meditation or daydreaming or just walking in nature. So it's like, I would love for people to go into these spaces and ask like, hey, like I'm stuck here, man. Like I've tried everything. Nothing's working. It's beyond me. So like, can you see it differently? Like from your perspective, what does it look like? And one of the things I ended up doing toward the end of my journey was painting and planting a flower garden. And like, that is not the kind of person I was, but MDMA like gave me a different, like, they're like, hey, have you considered maybe creating beautiful things would help you not feel like the anxiety and existential dread of the abyss. It's like planting flowers is so cool. Like it's like you plant it, you wait and wait and wait, and like you're like, this is never gonna happen. And suddenly there's a flower and you're like, wow, like that just happened. So yeah, I think that there is hope. And I really loved what you said about the little seed. It's like what beauty, joy, purpose, meaning, contribution do you want to leave? And if it's just that you figured out how to paint and plant a flower garden, like fantastic, you know?
Huge. I know. Imagine if every human being had a flower garden in their front yard. I mean, what would our world become? No, it's true. And by the way, I want to point out when I've interviewed Charles Eisenstein, Rack Razam, and there was one other person, I think, a couple people have said this, other people over the years, about really tuning in and listening and asking these ancient, wise beings, these spirits through these plants, like, maybe they actually have some answers to the world's problems, Like, I think it was Rack Razam who said, yeah, we could try 3D printing a glacier like they're talking about, or we could actually like sit down with intention, especially if we do it in groups or as a collective, and tune in, and maybe there's some brilliant solution that will come through. I don't know. It's, it's like there's no harm in trying, but I love that idea. It's like, it's true. It's like, well, you've been here for millions of years and we're kind of new and we're not getting something right. So maybe
we're clearly messing it up. Like, maybe we're not as smart as we think.
Exactly. Well, I want to talk a little bit about your book, Midnight Water. I want to hear a little bit about what it's about, what the themes are, and like what inspired you to finally write this book that was coming through you.
Yeah, I mean, I love that you recognize that like the book was like in me and now it's out in the world, because that's really how it has felt. It's like when people are like, how did you write this? I'm like, I had to. Like at some point, I just could not carry this around with me anymore. Like it had to be out in the world, distributed, available to be molded and interpreted and adapted however people needed to. But the story, started with my sister. She died of breast cancer when I was a faculty member at Hopkins. And that was like the first fork in the road. I could have just kind of grieved but stayed in academia, and I just knew that like it was a turning point and I needed to follow whatever that other path was. And then there was another turning point when I got fired from the MAPS trial in New York City, which it seems like, oh, death of my sister, getting fired from a job, like clearly death of my sister was harder, but in a way getting rejected from the field that I had committed so much of my life to, that I knew I was so good at and I was so passionate and I loved it more than, anything else I'd ever done. That felt harder in a way, because it was like, no, you don't get to participate in this thing that everyone else is excited about. And yet it was like a fork in the road. Like, what path do you want to walk? Do you want to walk the path of corporate pharmaceuticals, or do you want to walk the path of being closer to nature? Like being with your kids when they're young, like learning how to plant flowers. And so that's like, when I learned that there was a life beyond corporate academia. And then the final fork in the road, which is the final third of the book, was my dad's death. And in a way, what kind of got unearthed with my sister's death was resolved with my dad's death. And what I explore through the space of the book is like, what is it like to lose the most important person in your life and have everything upended, but then realize that that person was kind of like holding up a facade in front of a lot of issues that you were never going to look at unless they were no longer around. And so in a way, my sister's death forced me to really look at my childhood, how I had been raised, my dad in every possible memory and way we had related. And I was like, oh, I had really been hiding this from myself because it's like the facade was still there. And then losing my sister, it's like the facade crumbled, and what was exposed was like, oh, like I wasn't seeing reality. I was seeing what I wanted reality to be. And I'm really proud of myself. And I'm also kind of like in awe of my dad and like the way he died. And I think some of my family members are really upset by the book because it's so brutal and honest. But to me, that's what psychedelics offered me, was a resolution with one of the most difficult people in my life, so that I could be with him when he was dying, so that I could love him, so that I could forgive him. And it's like, how do you tell a story about forgiveness without telling how it started? You can't just jump the reader to the end, because then they're not going to believe it, or they're going to be like, oh, whatever. So it's like you have to take people through the hell realms and the dark spaces and the like dead ends and the like, oh my God, I don't know if I can live if this is, if this is really what I've lived through. Isn't that interesting? It's like you've already lived through it. And then you tell yourself you can't bear what you've already lived through. And it's because we're kind of haunted by everything in our past. And so what does it look like to be present and forward thinking, moving toward the future? So there's a little bit of science in there, but I think people are going to be shocked by how personal it is and how I basically put, in the spirit of self-experimentation, I like put my life into the world and said, like, okay, world, like, what can we teach people? Like, how can we teach people through this body, through this biography, in a way that's almost like it transcends my own personal story, I think. And a friend of mine read it and she's like, I would have thought this was a novel if I didn't know you were a real person. Wow. And so that's also cool that it's like, I want people to know that it's like, there's so many people out there who've survived things that you could never even imagine, who've tried things you could never imagine, and they are just normal like the rest of us.
You are not special. No, no. It's that's, first of all, that's beautiful, and this is an area that I am really passionate about myself, is kind of exploring psychedelics and the death, like the process of dying, because I've actually had both my dad and stepfather die in the last, my dad about 16 years ago and my stepfather just a few years ago. And to watch the processes and the system and the like my own internal process, their process. And my dad, I don't know about your specific case, but my dad had told us at a very young age that he never wanted to be kept alive if he ever got sick. Like, he was a scientist. He was very adamant about, like, I just want to die naturally. He used to say, take me out to the desert and throw me to the wolves with a bottle of bourbon. Like, and that was like, he was really like serious about it. Right. And I'm like, I don't think we can legally do that. But then when he died, it was this crazy process of like, he got rushed to the hospital, didn't want to be in the hospital. How do you bring him home? We tried to bring him home, and then they're like, he has 2 months to live. And then literally the day we were going to bring him home, he died. And I was like, God. Great. He got his wish. He wasn't going to be kept in, something. But it's, I've talked to a lot of people about this, about how, and I know even Paul Stamets, when I interviewed him, it was mostly around like the end of life therapy, like how we can work with psychedelics for people who have terminal illnesses and the death process, and how to make it part of our life instead of, again, bypassing that it exists, or like trying to deny it or run from it as a society. But how do we maybe make it a more meaningful, powerful, healing experience where, I don't know about you, but I always say I have this like tighter relationship with my father now since he died, like just the spirit realm.
No, I think you'll really be into the story, because I think there are a lot of father-daughter pairs out there who are really struggling right now, because it's like we're a microcosm of the issues with the patriarchy, and our dads suffered for being in that role in the patriarchy. At least my dad did, for sure. Mm-hmm. And just there might be real conflict, and I don't want to minimize the harm, but there's also these roles that we're playing as part of this system that's falling apart. And so like, what do psychedelics have to say about these relationships? Like, do they have anything to help repair those relationships? Like, now I can say for sure, no matter how terrible the man was in life, I could probably, support that person on their deathbed, because I see the potential for relief of suffering when a person doesn't have to embody that system that has been so damaging. And it's not to take away the benefits of that system. Certainly people have lived very joyous lives in the patriarchy, but when you see these men on their deathbed, it's like everything gets simplified, and they're like, oh, like that corporate job doesn't really matter. Like, it certainly created happiness for the time that it did, but like right now it just matters, like, am I home? Am I with my dog? Am I with my kids and grandkids? Like, can I die in peace? And my dad got that. And the person I was 10 years ago would have not wished that for him. So I was like, thank God I could mature enough in 10 years to be so happy that he got a good death, even under the circumstances. Everyone's like, oh, he died too young. I'm like, he died well. He got 65 years and he died so well. Like, if all of us could be as lucky as that one man, right? So it changes your perspective. And like, I think that being around death makes me a better person, and it kind of takes me out of my own stories. And so I think everyone benefits from going through that in advance of your own experience, because then you can see, like, what do I want? What don't I want? Like, a lot of people don't want psychedelics when they're dying. They just want pain relief and they want to be with their family. That's it. Pain relief, family. like,
Yeah.
or if it's not family, just whoever loves you the most, and that itself allows death to happen in a psychedelic way.
Wow. I'm like, that sounds like a really good title for a talk. Right there. But yeah, this is something I think is at least my prayer is going to be a topic of discussion more and more over time as hopefully as the popularity of psychedelics and conversations start expanding. I've had more and more of these. I've actually had clients that work as like death doulas that have gone through various like death trainings, and I have a client that works in green burials and works with psychedelics, but just like you just said, to have this psychedelic like experience, it doesn't even have to have any medicine involved at all, right. But to actually try to see it differently, and like you said, like learn something from it, have some kind of healing, have some perspective shift versus having people maybe like, yeah, like I thankfully probably sounds similar to you. I healed my relationship with my father, thankfully, just kind of by chance, like just a few years before he died. Wow. And so then the death process was sweet and beautiful. But had I not been there, it would have been like a regret, Right. And
no, and I meet lots of people who legitimately, hate their parents, hate mom, hate dad, hate whatever, everyone's got a reason. But I think the point of what I'm trying to share in the story is that hate only persists and endures through your life. Like, it doesn't end with death. It doesn't end when that relationship goes away. You can't hide from it. You can't ignore it. You can't stuff it away. So if there's someone that's causing you a lot of distress, like, maybe move into that and see, like, what is this? Why do I hate this person? Why do they cause me so much difficulty? And if I were saying this, like, do it sober, like, I would think that that's really unethical. But thank God we have medicines that can help you walk that path, people who can help you walk that path. So it's like, okay, you've got that, it's like the neighborhood in your mind that you don't want to walk in unless you're like drunk or high, or it's like you got a friend with you. Like, let's spend some time in that neighborhood. Like, what's so scary about that? Who lives there? Like, what are the things that you've exiled into that part of your consciousness or your body that you're like, no, I just don't go there at night. It's like, let's go there. It's not that bad. Like, I'll do it with you. Like, it's cool. And so I kind of, I see death as one of those invitations to go into those like difficult parts of your mind. Another metaphor I use is the labyrinth. So it's like, what are the parts of the labyrinth where you've hidden away all your worst, fears and shame and hatred and all of that good stuff? Like, let's go there. Like, come on, we've got help. We've got supplements that can help you go there.
So good. Well, Katherine, this has been an amazing discussion. I want to leave you some time to share about, the book, and also where can people find you? What do you have coming up over the next, 6 to 12 months? Are you just chilling out? And are you doing like a book tour or anything like that?
Yeah. So I just got back from London, Paris, and Barcelona. And before London, I was in Bermuda. So the book was written in Bermuda. And my cover artist, Eileen Hall, is from London. Here, I'll show you her cover art, which is just like amazing. I love it so much.
Oh, so nice.
Yeah. And so I wanted to kind of birth the book first in the places where it was inspired. So basically Vermont, Bermuda, and London. So kind of did that, feeling just like a lot of gratitude for the first month that this, amazing thing has been in the world. I promised myself I would stay put in Vermont for most of August, and I'm sticking to that. But I'm going to actually be starting a little book club through Psychedelic Sangha in New York, so people can buy the book, read it, and also discuss it with me, which is super fun. So we'll do that toward the end of August. I'm hoping to do an event in New York, but I'm just trying to kind of wait and see like what the right space is, because it's bookstores don't feel quite right. it takes a kind of certain place to want to feature something as weird as this book, right? And as like outspoken as me. But then I'm going to Mycelium Mysteries, which is a women's gathering around mushrooms in Wisconsin at the end of September, which is super fun. Like we camp out in these like little like Girl Scout dorm rooms and like have fires. And I know it's actually really trippy to just be with a bunch of women in the middle of like the woods, and there are no rules other than just like you want to, be a good person and take care of your community. And then at the end of November, I'll be doing a little California tour. So Berkeley, Santa Cruz, LA, San Diego. I have so many good friends out there, and it'll feel like a little bit of a homecoming. It's like coming back to the place that opened me up to so many possibilities. So that'll take me all the way through December, and then probably just chill for the winter. And then 2024 is like my oyster. Like, I don't know what it's going to have in store for me.
Well, I hope you can, maybe we can arrange something in the Hudson Valley area.
It'd be super fun.
There's a community here that would be interested in it.
Yeah.
So.
And what I've done is, it's like if someone has an idea and they want to run with it, I'm like, I'll be there, but what I've learned with books is that it's like they kind of follow their own path as they spread in the world. And so I've just been giving books away. People think that's dumb, but it's like I'd rather give someone a book than have them spend money on Amazon, which is the opposite of what you're supposed to do when your book first comes out. So if someone's like, oh, I really want to elevate this conversation in my community, I'm like, I'm there. But like, I'm not going to come to sell books. Like, I'll probably just end up giving away 10 books or something. And my publicist will be like, why are you doing this? Like, make people buy your book. But, I think it's all part of what the book is also trying to say, which is that you can upend the system. And in my case, contrary to popular wisdom, you can use the tools of the patriarchy to disrupt the patriarchy. Like I've taken what the patriarchy has given to me and I've turned it into something totally subversive that is almost itself like a mind-altering drug. And so like the more people that can experience that, the better. Like I benefit because it's creating the world I want to live in.
Yeah.
And I can't forget to mention on my website, so katherinemaclean.org, I took a little bit of a break while I was traveling, but I'm trying to kind of throw up little like local events and like the book club. The woman who did the art for the cover has art that she made that's inspired by the book. So I'm trying to kind of have the website be a place where people can experience the ethos of Midnight Water with the like the slight caveat that like if there's anything on here that you want access to but you can't afford it, just ask me, because it's really in the spirit of the book to give away what it has, brought into my life.
Oh, this is amazing. Beautiful. Well, we'll have all the links to everything. And, if you need anything or if you have like the locations of any of these upcoming book visits, talks out in California, we are happy to share that here in the podcast so everybody can
awesome.
Go check you out. But Dr. MacLean, Katherine, thank you so much for your time. And thank you so much for putting this book out into the world, having your voice shared. I think this is very important right now. I hope we can get you onto everybody's podcast very soon. Thank you so much for the work you're doing.
Thank you. I'm so glad this finally worked out in divine timing.
Perfect timing. Thanks so much. And we'll have another episode next Tuesday, everyone. Thank you. See you soon. I hope you enjoyed the episode. If you're feeling inspired, I'd appreciate it if you showed your love with a review. And check out my YouTube channel where you can find the video version of this podcast. You can also head to bethaweinstein.com to learn more about me and grab my free business growth trainings. Remember, you carry your own unique medicine, and your medicine is what we need for these times.